The hum of the ship's engines was a constant, low thrum beneath the soles of Dr. Elena Marquez's boots as she stood in the airlock, her breath fogging the visor of her helmet. The alien vessel loomed before her, its sleek, obsidian surface reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. It was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, organic yet mechanical, alive yet eerily silent. Elena adjusted the strap of her medical kit, her fingers trembling slightly. She wasn't just a xenobiologist. She was the first human to step onto an alien ship, the first to make contact with a species that had, until now, existed only in humanity's wildest imaginations. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor bathed in soft, bioluminescent light. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the ship itself were breathing. Elena stepped inside, her boots clicking against the floor, which felt more like polished bone than metal. Behind her, Commander Hayes and Lieutenant Patel followed, their weapons holstered but their hands hovering close. The tension was palpable, a thick, unspoken fear that clung to the air like static. The aliens, known only as the Veil, had invited them aboard, but the invitation had been terse, almost cold. There was no guarantee of safety. "Stay close," Hayes muttered, his voice crackling through the comms. "And remember, no sudden movements. We don't know what sets them off." Elena nodded, though her attention was already elsewhere. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling arching high above like the ribcage of some colossal beast. At the center stood a group of Veil, their forms towering and elegant, their skin a shimmering, iridescent blue. Their faces were angular, with large, almond-shaped eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. They regarded the humans with an air of detached curiosity, their expressions unreadable. One of the Veil stepped forward, its movements fluid and deliberate. It spoke, its voice a melodic cascade of clicks and hums that resonated deep in Elena's chest. The universal translator strapped to her belt struggled for a moment before spitting out a translation. "You are the humans. You have come to learn." Elena swallowed hard and stepped forward, ignoring Hayes's sharp intake of breath. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We've come to learn and to share. We want to understand each other." The Veil tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Understanding is rare," it said, "but we will observe." The next few hours were a blur of introductions and cautious exchanges. Elena quickly realized that the Veil were a species of few words, their communication sparse and precise. They showed little interest in small talk or pleasantries, their focus instead on the humans' technology, their biology, their intentions. It was clear that trust was not something they gave freely. But Elena was determined. She asked questions not just about their technology or their history, but about their culture, their beliefs, their way of life. At first, the Veil seemed puzzled by her curiosity, but slowly, tentatively, they began to respond. She learned that their society was built on logic and efficiency, with little room for emotion or individuality. They valued the collective above all else, their decisions made for the greater good, no matter the cost. It was during one of these conversations that Elena noticed a small Veil child, or what she assumed was a child, peeking out from behind one of the adults. Its eyes were wide with curiosity, its movements hesitant but eager. Elena smiled, crouching down to its level. "Hello," she said softly, holding out a hand. "I'm Elena." The child stared at her hand for a moment before reaching out, its slender fingers brushing against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Elena's chest. For the first time since stepping onto the ship, she felt a connection, a spark of understanding that transcended words. The moment was shattered by a sharp click from one of the adult Veil. The child quickly retreated, its eyes downcast. Elena straightened, her heart sinking. She glanced at the adult, who regarded her with a cold, unyielding gaze. "Do not interfere," it said, its tone final. Elena nodded, though the encounter lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of the child's curious eyes, the way it had reached out to her. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, a crack in the Veil's otherwise impenetrable facade. As the days passed, Elena found herself growing more comfortable aboard the ship. She spent hours studying the Veil's technology, their biology, their language. But it was the moments of connection, the brief glances, the hesitant gestures, that she cherished most. She began to see the Veil not as cold, emotionless beings, but as a species struggling to reconcile their rigid ways with the complexities of life. It was during one of her routine examinations that the crisis occurred. A sudden shudder ran through the ship, followed by a series of alarms that echoed through the corridors. Elena froze, her heart racing. "What's happening?" she asked, turning to the Veil scientist she had been working with. The scientist's expression was grim. "A malfunction in the core. We must evacuate." Elena's mind raced. The core was the heart of the ship, a massive reactor that powered everything. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But as she followed the scientist toward the escape pods, she noticed something. A group of Veil children, huddled together in a corner, their eyes wide with fear. The adults were ushering them toward the pods, but the children were too frightened to move. Without thinking, Elena broke away from the group and ran toward the children. "Elena, what are you doing?" Hayes shouted, but she ignored him. She knelt in front of the children, her voice calm but firm. "It's okay," she said. "We're going to get you out of here. Just follow me." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what the Queen's words meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. The Veil Queen's voice lingered in the air like a thunderclap, its weight pressing down on Elena's chest. She stood in the center of the human ship's observation deck, the vast expanse of space stretching out behind her through the panoramic viewport. The Queen's holographic image loomed before her, towering and regal, her iridescent skin shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, bore into Elena with an intensity that made her feel as though she were being dissected. "You saved the young ones," the Queen said, her voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the ship. "A curious act, for one who claims to seek only understanding." Elena straightened her posture, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their trembling. "It was the right thing to do," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. "I couldn't stand by and let them suffer." The Queen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "The right thing," she repeated as though testing the words. "A concept foreign to us. We act for the collective, for efficiency. Emotion has no place in survival." Elena met the Queen's gaze, her own resolve hardening. "Emotion is what makes us human," she said. "It's what drives us to protect, to connect, to grow. Without it, we're just machines." The Queen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, passing across her face. "You speak boldly, human, but words are meaningless without action. If you wish to prove the value of your emotions, you will face a test." Elena's heart skipped a beat. A test. The Queen's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. "A challenge, designed to measure the strength of your bond with my people. Succeed, and you will earn my trust. Fail, and your species will be deemed unworthy of further contact." Before Elena could respond, the Queen's image flickered and vanished, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit room. The weight of the Queen's words settled over her like a heavy cloak, the enormity of the task ahead pressing down on her shoulders. She had no idea what the test would entail, but one thing was certain. The future of humanity's relationship with the Veil rested on her shoulders. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Elena was escorted back to the Veil ship, where she was met by the same scientist she had worked with before. Its name, she had learned, was Kale, and though it still maintained an air of detachment, there was a newfound respect in its gaze. "The Queen's test will not be easy," Kale said as they walked through the ship's winding corridors. "It is designed to push you to your limits, to force you to confront the very essence of your being." Elena nodded, her mind racing. "What do I need to do?" Kale hesitated, its steps slowing. "The details are unclear, even to me, But it will require you to make a choice. One that will challenge your values, your beliefs, your very sense of self. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry. And if I fail? Kale's expression darkened. The consequences will be severe. Not just for you, but for your entire species. The words hung in the air between them, a grim reminder of what was at stake. Elena clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She couldn't afford to fail. Too much depended on her. They arrived at a massive chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a small, crystalline object. It glowed with a soft, ethereal light, casting shimmering reflections across the walls. "This is the heart of Vale," Kale said, its voice reverent. "It is the source of our power, the core of our existence. The Queen's test will involve it." Elena stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the crystal. It was beautiful, mesmerizing even, but there was something about it that made her uneasy. "What do I need to do?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Kale could respond, the Queen's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and commanding. "You must choose," she said. "The heart of Vale is failing. Without it, my people will perish. But to restore it, a sacrifice must be made." Elena's breath caught in her throat. A sacrifice? The Queen's holographic image appeared before her, towering and imposing. The heart requires a life force to sustain it. One life willingly given to save countless others. This is the test, human. Will you sacrifice yourself for my people? Or will you cling to your own survival? Elena's mind reeled, the weight of the choice crushing her. She looked at the heart, its glow flickering weakly, and then at Kale, whose expression was unreadable. "Is there no other way?" she asked, her voice trembling. The Queen's gaze was unyielding. "This is the way of the Vale. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It is logical, efficient, but you, human, value the individual. So choose. Prove the worth of your emotions." Elena closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She thought of the children she had saved, of the bond she had begun to form with Kale, of the hope she had felt just hours before. Could she really give all of that up? Could she sacrifice herself for a species that had shown her so little kindness? But then she thought of the alternative, of the Vale perishing, of humanity being cast aside, of all the potential for understanding and growth being lost. She thought of the child who had thanked her, of the spark of connection she had felt, and she knew what she had to do. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll sacrifice myself." The Queen's expression shifted, something akin to surprise flickering across her face. "You would give your life for my people?" Elena nodded, her heart heavy but her mind clear. "Yes, because it's the right thing to do." For a moment, the Queen was silent, her gaze piercing. Then slowly she nodded. "Very well. Proceed." Elena stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for the heart. Its light grew brighter as she approached, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 regrets. But she pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. As her fingers brushed the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through her, bright and blinding. She felt herself being pulled into the heart, her very essence merging with its light. It was overwhelming, terrifying, but also strangely peaceful. She closed her eyes, letting the energy consume her. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Elena opened her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was still standing, her hand resting on the heart, which now glowed with a steady, vibrant light. The Queen's voice broke the silence, her tone softer than before. "You have proven yourself, human. Your sacrifice was not required, but your willingness to make it has shown the strength of your bond with my people." The days that followed the Queen's test were a whirlwind of activity. The Vale ship, once a cold and sterile environment, now buzzed with a newfound energy. The crew moved with purpose, their usual detachment softened by a subtle but unmistakable shift in demeanor. Elena could feel it in the way they looked at her, no longer with suspicion or indifference, but with a quiet respect. She had proven herself not just to the queen, but to all of them. And yet, the weight of what she had done lingered, a constant reminder of the fragile bond she had forged. Elena spent much of her time in the ship's central hub, a vast chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. Kale was often by her side, its presence a steady anchor in the midst of the chaos. Together, they worked to bridge the gap between their species, sharing knowledge and ideas in a way that felt almost natural. But beneath the surface, Elena could sense a tension, a lingering uncertainty that neither of them could quite shake. "You've changed them," Kale said one day, its voice low and thoughtful. "The queen, the crew, even me. Your actions have forced us to reconsider what we thought we knew." Elena glanced at it, her brow furrowing. "I didn't do it to change anyone," she said. "I just did what felt right." Kale's eyes met hers, their glow softening. "And that is precisely what makes you so remarkable. You act not out of logic or efficiency, but out of something deeper, something we have long forgotten." Elena looked away, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe that their bond was strong, that the trust they had built would endure. But the memory of the Queen's test still haunted her, a stark reminder of how fragile that trust could be. It was during one of their routine exchanges that the alarm sounded, a sharp, piercing wail that echoed through the ship. Elena froze, her heart racing as the lights flickered and the consoles around her flashed red. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Kale's expression was grim as it scanned the data streaming across the screens. "A hostile vessel has entered our space," it said. "They are demanding our surrender." Elena's stomach churned. "Who are they?" "The Kryn," Kale replied, its tone darkening. "A species we have long been at odds with. They are ruthless, driven by a desire for conquest. If they board this ship, they will show no mercy." Elena's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and determination. She couldn't let this happen, not after everything they had been through. "We have to fight back," she said, her voice firm. "We can't let them take the ship." Kale hesitated, its gaze flickering to the screens. "The Queen has ordered us to stand down. She believes resistance is futile." Elena's eyes widened. "What? Why?" "The Kryn outnumber us," Kale explained. "Their technology is superior. The Queen believes that surrender is the only way to minimize casualties." Elena shook her head, her fists clenching at her sides. "No, there has to be another way. We can't just give up." Kale studied her for a moment, its expression unreadable. Then slowly it nodded. "There may be a way, but it is dangerous, and it will require your help." Elena didn't hesitate. "Tell me what to do." The plan was risky, bordering on reckless. The Kryn's ship was heavily shielded, but Kale believed that a concentrated burst of energy from the heart of Vale could disable their defenses long enough for the Vale to mount a counterattack. The catch? The heart was still unstable, and using it in such a way could cause irreparable damage or worse, destroy it entirely. "If we do this, there's no going back," Kale warned as they stood before the heart, its light flickering weakly. "The consequences could be catastrophic." Elena's jaw tightened. "And if we don't, the Kryn will destroy us. We don't have a choice." Kale nodded, its expression grim. "Then let us proceed." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Elena worked alongside Kale and a small team of Vale engineers, their movements swift and precise as they prepared the heart for the energy surge. The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity as they raced against the clock. When everything was ready, Elena stepped forward, her hand hovering over the heart. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "On my mark." Kale nodded, its eyes fixed on the console. "Ready." Elena took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, with a final glance at Kale, she pressed her hand to the heart. The surge of energy was immediate, a blinding wave of light that filled the room and spilled out into the corridors. Elena felt it coursing through her, a searing heat that threatened to consume her. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to hold on, to channel the energy into the ship's systems. For a moment, it seemed as though the plan had failed. The heart's light flickered, its pulse growing weaker with each passing second. But then, just as Elena was about to give up, the energy surged again, stronger than before. The ship shuddered, the consoles around them sparking as the heart's power rippled through the vessel. "It's working," Kale said, its voice filled with awe. "The Kryn's shields are down." Elena's heart leapt, but there was no time to celebrate. "Now," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the energy. "Attack!" The Veil ships surged forward, their weapons blazing as they engaged the Kryn. The battle was fierce, the two sides locked in a deadly dance of fire and light. Elena watched from the console, her breath caught in her throat as the Veil fought with a ferocity she had never seen before. But the Kryn were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Despite the Veil's efforts, it seemed as though the tide was turning against them. Elena's heart sank as she realized that they might not win after all. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, the Queen's voice echoed through the ship, calm and commanding. "Retreat," she said. "Fall back to the rendezvous point." Elena's eyes widened. "What? We can't give up now." Kale shook its head, its expression grim. "The Queen is right. We cannot win this battle, but we can survive to fight another day." Elena wanted to argue, to protest, but she knew it was futile. With a heavy heart, she watched as the Veil ships disengaged, their retreat swift and orderly. The Kryn did not pursue, their attention focused on the crippled Veil ship. Kale's gaze was steady, its expression unreadable. "We lost the battle," it said, "but not the war. The Kryn may have won today, but they have not broken us. And as long as we stand together, they never will." Elena's breath caught in her throat, her heart swelling with a mixture of grief and hope. Kale was right. They had been tested and they had endured. The bond between humans and Veil had been forged in fire, and it would not be easily broken. As the ship limped toward the rendezvous point, Elena felt a sense of resolve settle over her. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she knew that they would face it together. And in that moment, she realized that the true test had only just begun.